Welcome, this is Bill with investingsystems.com. I'm going to talk about a real simple strategy today that I use to help find stocks that are setting up for good, quick swing trades. A few days, a couple of weeks. I'm using one moving average here, and that's the 9 exponential. This is a daily chart with a 9 EMA. I actually have the moving average as a thick line on this chart to make it stand out, and I don't have any other moving averages on here. But what I want you to notice is that, back over here, the stock broke below the 9 EMA, and then you can see that it basically ran down the 9 EMA, sloping down, not one single close above it until here, right? And so what I like to do is run scans for stocks that have been trading below the 9 EMA for X amount of days, or maybe a long period of time, whatever, that just today or yesterday or even the day before closed above the 9 EMA for the first time in a while. And so this is actually one that is interesting to me because when I ran the scan and found this stock, which basically closed over the 9 EMA back here this day, this is the first day that it came to my attention, right? When I looked back at the chart and noticed these real tiny narrow range days preceding that, this day where it poked over it, it looked really interesting to me, right? And so this day or the very next day, I believe, we were talking about it on the live show. I was pointing this out to everybody on the morning shows that we do, and this is really sort of an interesting situation. This particular stock, get my screen set up here. This particular stock, once it broke above the 9 EMA, and you can see that I drew a horizontal line above the high of the first close there, and so an entry would have basically been confirmed the very next day. One thing to pay attention to is the slope of the 9 EMA as well, and the idea that the stock was trading below it, not one single close, for quite some time. Then you'll notice that the stock started climbing up the 9 EMA. The closes were all above it, and the important thing is that you got some follow through so that the 9 period exponential, I should say the 9-day exponential moving average, started turning up. And that's really important because if you look at a lot of charts, you'll see that a stock may be above it or poking above it or chopping around it or whatever, but I pay a lot of attention to the slope. So you can see what happened there. I mean, that was just a really nice sort of a rounding bottom. There were a couple other clues on the chart here. Once it popped above the 9 EMA, it started climbing up it. And you'll notice that a lot. You'll notice that stocks, they climb up and they ride below the 9 EMA. Let me just fast forward out into time here. Right, so after we identified that, it made a pretty nice move, and then of course it came back in. You had this consolidation, and notice you started getting these closes below the 9 EMA, right? And so the stock was still on my radar. It set up a couple of more times. Over here, it closed above the 9 EMA, and I drew this like as an entry, but it never exceeded that high until over here, right? So like say over here, when it finally started closing over the 9 EMA, if you took an entry over the high of that day, and put a stop down here around the lows, then you could have taken that trade. You could have actually held it through all of this. But the idea is that, it's set up a second time with basically the same type of thing, and once it popped back above the 9 EMA, it started sloping up, and you can see the kind of, and quite frankly, it's kind of set up again. Right, you'll get these pullbacks to the 9 EMA and then bounce off of it and resume the trend. So, and of course, there's other things I look at, the stochastics, the MACD, the RSI that I have here. Let me show you another one that was really interesting too, that I found the same exact way. And let me take this back in time a little bit. I found this particular stock in the exact same way, running a scan for stocks that had closed below the 9 EMA for many days, and then today had a close above it. So this would have been identified this particular day I looked at this chart and said, well, this looks pretty interesting. I drew this little sort of tight range here. The stock's starting to poke over the 9 EMA. Interestingly enough, it was kind of starting to turn up here, right? And there's a couple other spots on the chart where it looks like it was turning up, but you didn't have a close over the 9 EMA. So anyway, you can see that this day it broke the top of this range and it moved over the high of the day that it actually first day that it closed above the 9 EMA in quite some time. Again, you'll see how it started riding up the 9 EMA. It started sloping up, and the stock made a pretty nice move subsequently. And if you zoom out on the chart there, you can see that, basically when it was trading below the 9 exponential all this time and then started moving above it, that was right at the spot where you got a really nice trend change. You can also see down here that the MACD crossed positive. Actually, it was a little bit before that, but the MACD went positive, so the RSI crossed up through 30. So everything was kind of lining up here. But sort of the concept here is that when a stock's been trading below the 9 EMA for a period of time, then finally starts breaking above it and it turns up, it can make a really nice move like this. And of course, you get a close below it here, but no real confirmation, right? Like it didn't break down here. And so, it's not just a matter of a stock closing above or below the 9 EMA. It's also about what the pattern looks like as well. I'm going to show you one more quick example here of one that really sort of worked out in the same way, and another, and all these were basically what we talked about. I identified them, I brought them to the live shows, we analyzed them in the Investing Systems Trading Service. This was another interesting one. This one was kind of a thin, low volume stock, but it was the same concept. Ran my scans, looked for stocks that were trading below the 9 EMA for a period of time, then started closing above it. Basically, this day right here, it closed a little bit above it. It might have come on my radar that day. A lot of times it's not really all that important that you identify it, the very first day. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to run scans for stocks that have been trading below the 9 EMA, moved back above it, and then go back several days. Even a week. I'll go back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. A lot of times you'll see this type of pattern where it'll run up a little bit, pull right back to that 9 EMA, and then give you another opportunity. And quite frankly, when I was looking at this chart, I was seeing like sort of a rounding bottom, and so I drew this horizontal level here across sort of these previous highs. And so this particular stock didn't really require you to necessarily get an exact precision entry right at the break of the high the day it closed over the 9 EMA, although that would have been, that would have made for a good entry right there that day as soon as it exceeded this high. And of course, with any sort of trading, these type of patterns can fail, so you always have to have a stop at a previous low. Looking at this chart, this is where I marked the stop originally because it made the most sense. The stock was either going to make a move or it was going to fail and break down from here. So anyway, it's just a really sort of a nice, and you can see where the MACD crossed here as well, preceding the move above the 9 EMA. So that's like one little kind of cool strategy. And, quite frankly, every night when I run my scans for stocks moving above the 9 EMA, having been below it for a period of time, I get a lot of stocks that show up, and basically I use my judgment as to which ones really look interesting, look like they're set up. Not every single stock that has been trading below the 9 EMA, closing below it I should say, but you kind of get a feel for these patterns when you've been doing this as long as I have, and I get a good good sort of idea. I could draw a trend line here. You get this nice tight range. I mean, these are the type of patterns that I actually spot with my eyes, right? And so I can look through a whole bunch of charts, and certain ones will stand out. And these in particular, Here's another thing I like to do is just on any chart when I'm going through my watch list, I like to use the 9 EMA in this very configuration that I have here without other moving averages or anything like that on there, and just look at how a stock is trading in relation to that moving average, whether it's chopping above and below it. I mean, a lot of times a stock will, if it's chopping above and below it, it'll have some action that you can't really glean anything off of, right? But when a stock has a nice change in trend, this is a useful way to spot that. And that 9 EMA is a pretty fast moving average, so you have to realize that the price bars on a typical stock are going to cross it a lot. But you also want to sort of pay attention to the slope of it. That's sort of the more important thing, because you'll notice these are sort of extreme examples. In the shorter term, there'll be plenty of other stocks that will actually trade sort of above and below it for short periods of time. And you'll get these runs above the 9 EMA, maybe a pullback to it and another move off of it. And so, this stock at this point in time seems to be climbing up the 9 EMA, and at this point I would just be basically waiting for it to break out here. There was actually a nice little trade right here on a pullback. So anyway, I hope you found this useful. We look at the 9 EMA all the time in the Investing Systems Trading Service.